Welcome to Life, Lessons, and Laughter with your host, Glenn Ambrose.
Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. Welcome. Today, we are going to discuss parent-child dynamics. So, I think with this one, it's important to first take a deep breath and center yourself. The reason is that as we're growing up, most of what we're exposed to is our family of origin. So our family of origin creates our dynamics, right? So like our initial dynamics, our initial triggers, our initial issues, and sometimes most stuff can be traced right back there, right? Relationship issues, all kinds of stuff. So this podcast can trigger people. It can trigger parents. It can trigger children. It can trigger both to become defensive. And sometimes it's even the reverse, which was often my case, which is an interesting dynamic. Like when I was growing up, because of what society labeled as my poor behavior, it would, teachers and principals and stuff would trace it back to my home life as if there was something wrong with my home life. And of course, and depending on how you want to look at it, which perspective you're coming at it from, there was something wrong with my home life, but it wasn't anybody's fault. It wasn't my parents' fault. It's just how I was and how I was fitting in, which I think is the case for everybody. So like I used to get very defensive when people would attack my family, because even though I was very different from my family, I could sense and feel the love. And I could understand that they were doing the best that they could. They were really trying. Now, of course, when I got older and I was really confused hitting adolescence, and I needed to blame my confusion on somebody, I directed it at my parents for a period of time, later in life. But that was just a period that I was going through, trying to figure out who the heck I was and why I didn't fit in. And it had to be somebody's fault. And I was trying everything that I could, so it couldn't be mine, and, blah, blah, blah. But like when I was young, and then after I woke up, especially, I knew this before I woke up, but especially when I was young and after I woke up, like I'd get defensive if anybody said anything negative about my parents or my upbringing. And I mean, to some degree, rightfully so, I guess. There's a certain dynamic to this that kind of takes place with everyone we care about anyways, right? If like, it's okay for us to talk crap about our family or our loved ones, but as soon as somebody else does it, it's like, whoa, you don't have the right to do that, right? So that's a whole nother podcast, because deep down we do love these people and we know it. So even if we're venting a little or something, it's, that's all it is on some level to us, even if we think we mean it. But when push comes to shove, we're going to, most people stand up for the ones that they love. So So back to the dynamics of this podcast, like really, don't don't ride a wave of emotion. And this is kind of good advice, I guess, for listening to any of my podcast or listening to any information with the intention of seeing things from different perspectives or healing or something like that. Like, you got to center yourself, and if you get triggered, do your best not to ride the trigger wave out of reality. Stay focused on staying centered. And if you don't agree with something, or if you don't like the way it's phrased or something, that's okay. Just, like, you have the right to say, I don't really agree with that. I don't really see that that's true. Okay, fine. But don't shut your brain down and shut your ears off. Just keep listening, and you have the right to your opinion. And maybe later on, you'll come to a different understanding. Maybe later on in the podcast or in the book or whatever your information you're taking in, you'll come across something, a lot of information that does click with you. Maybe that piece will never click with you, and that's okay. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, And I was fortunate enough to kind of have that realization very early on as I was taking in information, because I wasn't capable of taking in and comprehending and absorbing everything that I was taking in. So sometimes I was like, that's a load of crap. And I wanted to slap close the book and say, screw this or whatever. But I was like, no, I'll just push that to the side, and then I'll continue on, because I think this person might have things to say that can benefit me. And then, oftentimes I would, almost always actually, I would come to a new understanding of what I was resistant to. I was just wasn't ready to hear it at that time. So all this to say, stay open, stay relaxed. Nothing's that serious. Like, just stay open and contemplate. Just contemplate. Oh, is there any truth to that? Oh, am I feeling this emotion because I'm getting triggered? Ooh, that might mean that there's something there. Stuff like this, So yeah, I'm going to try to come at this from both directions, because I think it's important. Because I think if we don't, there's a tendency to blame other people. Well, there's definitely a tendency to blame other people. And I don't want this to be the case, because I truly don't believe that anyone's to blame. It's just that it's just understanding this dynamic and between parents and children, and why these things occurred, and understanding them better makes you better capable of dealing with it. So with that being said, maybe you guys will understand why I did such an explanation in the beginning once you hear the quote that kind of sparked this. Or I don't know if it's a quote or what, but I saw this somewhere, and I was like, ooh, that's an interesting way to come at things. And I saw it from two different sides, so I thought it would be a good topic. So what I read was, how your kids treat you when they no longer need you for food and shelter is a direct reflection of how you made them feel when they needed you to survive. Okay, so basically it's saying that, how your adult children treat you now that they don't need you to survive is a direct result of how you made them feel when they needed you, when they needed you growing up. So I look back on this, and my initial reaction is, okay, well, what's my relationship with how I treat my parents? And, I've talked about this many times. I'm not extremely close in the way other people would describe being close with your family. I don't spend a ton of time with them. I don't talk with them constantly. And that's a result of a lot of things. But one aspect of it is, it was because of who I am as a person. right? And it's this, like, I don't think that that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think that we need to find what works for us. We're all individuals, and it's not it like society tells us if we're really close with our family, then we're a good person and we really love them. And if we're not, then there must be something wrong, right? Which I think is a load of crap. Because I see a lot of people that are extremely close with their families and they have nothing but drama, turmoil, heart wrench, and it's just a nightmare. And they can't pull away because of this dysfunctional negative behavior, because of the societal pressure that they need to be close to them because they're their family. Now that sometimes there are families that are very close together, and sure, whenever you have people that are close together, there's going to be a certain level of drama. You're going to get on each other's nerves sometimes. That's normal. That's not what I was talking about a moment ago. I'm talking at a high level of dysfunction where it's causing major turmoil in your lives, and you can't get out of it. That's the problem. Having a certain level of turmoil and disagreements and dysfunction in a family is normal. That's part of being in a community. That's part of learning to deal with learning to navigate difficulties, and understanding that the love you have for somebody is more important, right? That's a sense of community, and that's a beautiful thing. But I mean, if you have, one of your siblings coming in stealing all your crap, year after year, and buying drugs with it, and you can't figure out how to separate yourself from that dysfunctional behavior, that's a problem. That's your problem. They've got their own problems, but you've got your problem. Like, unconditional love doesn't mean you allow yourself to be consistently abused and stay in an abusive relationship. That's not what unconditional love means. It means you love them regardless. Even if you have to cut them out of your life because they're destroying yours, you love them anyway. You do it because it's the right thing to do, and you can't continue enabling them, and you love them, and them being able to take advantage of you is not benefiting you, and it's not benefiting them. It's just enabling them to continue their negative behavior. So unconditional love is a feeling, and enabling is not unconditional love. Okay, so that's the overview. So there's not one picture of a relationship with your family that means everything. Okay, because the initial reaction, right, is like, how your kids treat you. This is why it's so important to slow down and read the words of things and get the understanding deeper instead of the initial reaction. The initial reaction is how your kids treat you when they no longer need you for food and shelter is a direct reflection of how that they made you feel when they needed you to survive. So, okay, my parents and I aren't real close in the normal sense of the word. I think the love is there, but we don't spend a ton of time together. So people from an outside perspective, and maybe even us initially, if we just think of it real quick, we don't dive into it. Even my parents and myself might interpret that as like, oh my God, my parents did bad stuff to me, and now I'm not close to them as an adult. But that's not what this is saying. Okay. So don't go with your initial reaction. Slow down. It says how your kids treat you, not how much time do you spend with them. How your kids treat you. I think I treat my parents with respect, and I think they treat me with respect, and I think we love each other very much. And so I think that is a reflection of how they treated me when I was a kid. Right? Because like I said, when I was a kid, if like I knew I was dysfunctional and I wasn't fitting into society, and I was confused and I didn't understand why and all that stuff. But as soon as one of the teachers started making a comment, this is really nice, when the adults are doing this. I'll tell you, I experienced so much poor behavior from adults when I was a child. It's kind of embarrassing. You'd think as an adult you wouldn't drop down to the level of a child and go tit for tat with them. And it seems like that happened consistently with the adults, consistently with the teachers. A little less with the principals and the vice principals. Maybe they were a little bit better versed in discipline, or maybe they had a little more power. I don't know. But the teachers, wow. Yeah, I had a lot of them that just, I mean, granted, I understand I would frustrate them and that would bring that behavior out of them. But I mean, like if they were to grow up a little bit, I think that would have been helpful. But this is my point. Like teachers literally would be like, just ripping me, just telling me how much of a horrible person I was and such a pain in the ass and blah, 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 blah. And that, my home life must be a nightmare. And I mean, they would insult my parents, your parents must be crappy parents and all. I mean, it was horrible. Some of the stuff that they said, especially to a little kid, and like sometimes I would allow them to unleash on me, especially, when I was younger. When I was older, I wouldn't allow it. But when I was younger, I was just, you feel powerless and you're like, okay, they're going to unleash on me for a while. If I do anything back, I'm going to get in more trouble. So I'll just shut up and let them go. And sometimes I would do that. And then as soon as they started touching on my home life, I'd lose my mind. I'd go, don't you freaking talk about them. And I'd go right back at them because I knew I could feel that my parents loved me. Like I couldn't, I've tried to explain this before. It's like there was lots of love in my house. There was lots of external expressions of love through actions. Like we weren't overly lovey, huggy, I love you, I love you, I love you all the time. We did have a little bit of that, right? There was definitely some of that, but it wasn't overly emotional, lovey. What I mean is like my parents were always there, like in a good way. They were always there. My I've said my father coached my little league team. I hated that. I hated him being the coach of my little league team at the time because I had a bad temper. And I would always get in trouble. And my father didn't want it to look like he was showing favoritism to me. So I was on the, I'd get ripped out of games and thrown on the bench constantly. And at practice. It was, it wasn't fun. And then I'd catch it all the way home. And then I'd catch it at home. So it wasn't fun. However, like after my son was born, and I told my parents this at one point, like, I know it was extremely important. The most important thing for me to be there for my son. Not every weekend, which if that's your gig, that's fine. It's just, for me, I had to be there. I just knew I needed to be there on basically a daily basis. I was with my son 5 days a week. We changed the schedule a little bit to 4 days a week, but more hours. So 4 days a week is consistent time with your child. That's what I knew it was going to be like that. Before I even got it, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. That's how I see myself as a father. And they're like, you're not going to get that. Like how? I'm like, I don't know. That's how I see myself as a father, the consistent father figure in their life. And I've told my parents, I'm like, I think, I don't know where that came from. It was just this inner knowingness that that was what was going to happen. And it could have been from a lot of this stuff from my childhood, that my parents were there. They were there. Like, we'd argue, they didn't understand me. I was confused, all kinds of turmoil going on, turned into a nightmare during my teenage years, all this stuff, but they were there. I always knew they were there. A lot of times I didn't even like that fact. I didn't like them coaching my little league team, and I didn't like them being in my life when I got older, and I pushed them out and all that stuff, but I knew they were there. Right. And that played a part. So maybe that is part of, or the reason why that's what I felt I needed to do as a father. Maybe that's where I got it. So this is why this topic is so interesting to me, because there's so many layers to it. It's so interesting to me because, I love dynamics. So I see multiple dynamics in all this stuff. So it's like, on one level, I just explained how my parents were always there, whether I liked it or not. And that impacted me in a positive way growing up, and as a man and as a father. So I think it impacted me enormously. So that's great, right? And that's deep. Like, this is why I like looking at things deeply, because you got to look below the surface to see that. Because if I just look at it on more of a surfacey level and I go, okay, what was it like growing up in my house? Like, I'll kind of another aspect of this thing that I was reading is a direct reflection of how you made them feel when they needed you to survive. So when they needed you to survive, that's referring to how I felt as a child. At a young age, how I felt as a child, at a young age, was completely misunderstood. They were always there, and I knew intellectually that they loved me, but I couldn't connect with them in the same way. It seemed that my parents and my sister spoke the same love language, and their minds worked the same way, and they could communicate with each other really well. And they could connect with each other energetically. Like, I could feel it, and I wanted that. I remember desiring that connection that I would see, like, between my sister and my father, or my sister and my parents. And like, I could feel it and see it, that their I don't know, their similarities would resonate. And I was like, I was like, yeah, I want to, I'm part of this family. I want that too. And then, and they wanted to connect with me just as much as, if not more than, I wanted to connect with them. And that's what I felt, right? That's what I knew. That's what I could see. That's what I could sense. And that really made a big, big, big difference. But the problem is I couldn't really connect. I couldn't, because I was different, and at that young age, it affected me. I think I got lots of benefits with them trying to connect, knowing they wanted to connect, knowing that they loved me. I think that was probably my saving grace, because if I didn't have that, I would have really been screwed, because the actual connection was where we struggled as a family. Like, they didn't. I did, so like, we just couldn't connect fully and feel that closeness, that oneness as a family unit. I just, I've told this story before. I remember as a young kid, my sister and my father, like, playing a game. My father would pretend to steal food. Well, not pretend. He would steal some food off my sister's plate at dinner time, and they'd laugh, and it was a game, and she'd be like, no, stop it. And he's like, oh, and he'd get tricky and get a piece. And, like, and I could feel their bonding, and I'd be sitting on the other side of the table, just watching, like, feeling their connection. and their joy and their playfulness and going, oh, I want that. I want that. And then my father would turn to do it with me. And I'd be like, I'd get all excited because now it was my turn, to connect. And my father had tried to do the same thing. And I would react and like fight him off from my food. I was I don't know if it was my personality, the fact that I was a boy, maybe a little more aggressive, that I would get a little more aggressive defending my food. So instead of a kind of a playful, no, it was like, I mean, I was kidding. I didn't want to hurt him, but it was, I defended more fiercely my food because, like I said, I don't know why. Maybe it was my personality or I was a little more aggressive. And then the game would have to end really quick. Like my father would want to play the game, but I would be so aggressive that you can't maintain that aggressiveness for long because somebody actually is going to get stabbed with a fork, So it would end abruptly. And then I'd be like, oh no, like there'd be a part of me that wanted to keep playing and connecting, but we didn't. And I didn't understand at the time, a part of me was like, oh no, I was too aggressive and I wrecked the game, or why isn't he playing with me anymore? I don't know. I was a little kid. It was confusing, but that aspect of not being able to connect and not really feeling accepted because I was always in trouble, I was I was I was very ADHD. So I was very high energy, but I was also, my impulse control was horrible. So I would always just find myself doing things, which would always get me in trouble. And then they'd always ask me why. And I always would say, I don't know. And they'd think I was lying, and I wasn't. I literally didn't know how I had gotten there. An impulse struck me and I found myself doing it. Next thing I know, I was in trouble. So there wasn't thought. Everybody thought, that's, I guess I won't stay on this, but that's something that I find interesting in society now is like when people behave negatively, people judge them like they consciously chose to behave like that. It's like, seriously? Like when somebody loses their temper, they're like, oh, they shouldn't lose their temper. It's like, well, no kidding, they shouldn't lose their temper. Of course they shouldn't lose their temper. What does that have to do with what just transpired? Well, they shouldn't. It's like, what? Yeah, and it happens sometimes. People lose their temper. Like, what? Do you think they sat down and said, well, I have a choice to lose my temper or I have a choice not to? I think it would be more appropriate to lose my temper right now. And then they go off. Do you think that that's actually what happened? Is that what happens when you lose your temper? You sit down and you decide acting like a complete jackass is the right move? Is that what, like, that's how you live? Nobody lives like that, So anyway, back to the topic at hand. It's, not being able to connect. It's, like, I don't look at it as my parents' fault, like, at all, because, like, I look at it and I'm like, how would they possibly know? I've explained this before. It reminds me of that book, The 5 Love Languages, because that's an interesting dynamic. The dynamic you can use in different scenarios. So if you understand it, so the dynamic is one that, we all have a different love language. And of course, it can be more than one combined, 2 or 3 combined, a little of each, whatever. But we all have, just keep it simple. There's 5 love languages, like, I probably won't remember all of them, but physical touch, words of affirmation, gifts, quality time, and one other one. So like these, but to me, the interesting part of the dynamic of the 5 love languages is the idea that we're just kind of born like this or whatever, like, or we develop it at a very young age, right? The way we give and receive love, because the way that we receive it unconsciously determines the way that we give it. Because if somebody gives you, like, let's say your love language is physical touch, and somebody gives you words of affirmation, and you're like, ooh, that's nice. And then they give you a gift and you go, ooh, that's nice. And they spend quality time with you and you go, ooh, that's nice. And then all of a sudden they give you this huge hug and this physical contact. And that's your love language. You go, oh my God, this feels so good. That's what I needed. That's what I wanted, right? So it feels so good to you that when you want to express your love, of course, you're going to unconsciously try to do it the same way. Why? Because it felt good for you. So therefore, if it, like, and you're not sitting there knowing this, when you're 8, you're not going like, well, there's 5 love languages and I seem to enjoy this, but other people, like, you only know what your experience is. So there's no way for anybody to know that there are even other love languages, let alone what those love languages are and which ones have which one. Right. So, of course we can learn about this and figure it out as we get older, but the interesting part is we tend to give in the way that we enjoy receiving, because it's all we know. We don't know anything else. So, so my parents, I think it was even more confusing for them because my sister came first. Like, like if my sister came second, maybe it would have been less confusing, but then I wouldn't have gotten the pressure that I needed to turn into who I needed to turn into. So, I'm not saying it's that they should have. I think everything that we go through is a perfect system to create what we need to experience to wake up. So, even some of the difficulties, all the difficulties that I experienced helped me wake up later on. So I don't regret them. It's just I'm talking about dynamics here and understanding them. So, like, who knows? Maybe if I came first and my parents thought a certain way, but it didn't work with me, they would have been like, well, wait a minute. We need to try something else. The way we think doesn't work in raising children. Right? Because it's not working with our child. And then then maybe they learn a new way of they open up their mind, who knows, go seek help, find different ways of treating a child. And then all of a sudden my sister comes along and they're like, oh, well, this one, I guess children are different because this one kind of clicks with the way that we think. But my sister came first. So it's like, it seemed to me, and who knows, I could be wrong. This is just my perspective. It seemed to me that my parents and my sister kind of were of the same mindset. Their minds all worked the same. So then you've got 2 adults raising a child and everything seems to be going well. So what's the feedback? Oh, I must be doing something right, which they were. They were doing the right thing with my sister because it worked. But then I come along and they're like, well, like, how you raise children is how you raise children. It wasn't so individualized back then. So it's like, so the fact that it worked reinforced that there was nothing wrong with the way they were parenting, that there was something wrong with me. Right? So that's the dynamic. So they just kept trying the same things over and over, expecting a different result because they didn't know any better. They didn't know that there was other ways to parent. They didn't know that, it was just very logical and clear, and they'd look at it and it made perfect sense to them. And quite honestly, looking back, the way they think is very logical. And it makes a lot of sense. Like, quite honestly, if I was them, I probably would have done the same thing. Because I get it now. Like, like, hey, don't do this and then you won't suffer. And I was like, yeah, but I got to try it anyway. That's not normal. That's not the norm. It's like, so no wonder it was confusing for them. So yeah, now where am I going with this? um, I think I'm just going to take a step back and kind of read um, what this podcast is about and see what jumps out. So it's this parent-child dynamics. It's, you know, the way, so the way your kids treat you when they no longer need you for food and shelter is a direct reflection of how you made them feel when they needed you to survive. So, you know, one piece of this that just popped up is we need to look at this in a broad conceptual way, because otherwise you, like I was talking about, we get triggered if we zoom too close and look at this too closely. It's I don't think we get the deeper meaning behind it. So when I needed somebody, supposedly, you know, that I needed somebody. Well, apparently I didn't need somebody because I didn't have them and I ended up waking up. Now, if I had somebody that could connect with me all the way through life, like my parents, maybe more teachers, there were some good teachers that actually were capable of connecting. There were just few and far between. But like, if I had more of that, would I, like, I don't know. I don't know that would have benefited me in the long run. Right. It's easy to look back and go, oh yeah, well, you know, like I was doing earlier. I don't understand how adults, especially in the teaching industry, are so ignorant about how to deal with children. Like, that's your job. That's your it's literally your job. And I understand that we don't, like, they didn't have the ADHD back then, but I mean, a troubled child is a troubled child. Insulting them and just throwing them out of class and label, you know, telling them that they're bad over and over and over. You think that that's going to fix them? Like, it's absurd to me. But but it can be very frustrating. And, you know, God knows teaching is a very difficult occupation. I couldn't do it, which doesn't mean too much, because I believe we have to take responsibility. And, like, I couldn't do it well. That's why I don't do it. Right. So, like, if there's teachers out there that are using that as an excuse, well, you don't understand. It's really difficult. It's like, well, if it's really difficult for you, then don't do it. Like, maybe you should get into another occupation. Like, I do life coaching because it's not difficult for me, because I like it. I enjoy it. Like, if your career, and this goes with anything, teachers, nurses, doctors, every profession out there, software engineers, if you don't like it, you shouldn't be doing it. You know. But it's easy to look back and go, they should have done this, they should have done that. My life would have been smoother if I experienced this or if I experienced that. But, like, what, to me, I have to take a step way back and go, okay, what's the point of life? Because this is fleeting and temporary, and I believe we're eternal beings. So, like, really, what's the point? And to me, it's to wake up, because once I woke up, I experienced more peace and love and happiness than I ever did before. So everything that led to that, me, it's like, well, it was worth it. It kind of needed to happen for me to wake up, because I think waking up is the most important thing we can do while we're here. Waking up to the joy of life, you know, because the rest of it's just suffering. So, you know, the fact that I had to go through a bunch of suffering when I was younger, I don't, when I think deeply about it, I don't harbor resentments or anger, because it's like, it's what got me to where I am. So if anything, I should be grateful for it. And on good days, I really am, you know. Thinking back to being a child and some of the things that were said and done to me, it's like, oof, you know, it's like, wow. I don't know how somebody thought that was a good idea. You know, as an adult, I don't get that one. But then other parts, you look back and you go, well, they're human. They're human. And I caused a lot of frustration because of not fitting into what society told me I was supposed to be. I wanted to. I just was literally incapable of it. This is why a lot of people thought I was trying to be a pain in the ass, and I wasn't. I was actually trying to fit in at a young age. It was just by the time I was like 14, I realized that I couldn't. So then it was like, well, and I had put all this pressure on myself to be a good person because I really wanted it more than anything. I really wanted to be accepted and approved of and feel that connection with my family and loved and not judged. And I wanted that more than anything. It was just at 14, I realized that I couldn't get it. It wasn't happening, So then I broke left and I stopped trying to appease society. And I just started doing whatever the hell I wanted, which really infuriated everybody and drove them absolutely insane because they couldn't control me in any way, shape, or form. And they looked at my attitude and they could tell I didn't care. I didn't care what they thought anymore. I mean, I did on some level, but I had pushed that way, 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 way down. And it was just like, it's me against you. So let's go. I'm gonna do me. And, if you've got a problem with that, I'm willing to go all the way to straighten this problem you have with me out. So whatever you want to do, let's go. Consequences, I'll face them. You want to argue? I'll argue. You want to fight? I'll fight. What do you want to do? Let's go. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go back to how I felt as a child, trying to appease you, because I can't. Like I had accepted that I couldn't, and I was actually right. I couldn't. I was physically, literally incapable of fitting into society in the way that they wanted me to fit in. It was just, to them, they saw it as being a rebel, and I just saw it as accepting reality. It's just how it is. This is my lot in life. So I thought, right? So then I get older. So, this is why I see this in two ways. Well, I've explained it in a few different ways, but it's like, you think back to the childhood and you think about what you didn't get and the mistakes that adults made in your life, namely your parents. And it's like, ooh, that affected me. Ooh, that hurt, So yeah, okay, well that's one way of looking at it, and we got it, But I think, well, hopefully we've gotten to the stage in society now. I know it's pretty well known that blaming your parents doesn't do anything. It doesn't help. It doesn't change anything, So why do it? Like, if you're just sitting there blaming your parents for your upbringing and you're upset with them, I recommend doing the work to get beyond that, to work through those resentments and let them go, because you do not have a possibility of being content and happy without that. You can lie to yourself. I did it. You can push it down and pretend it doesn't matter. But until you make peace with your upbringing, there's no way you can be happy, because it's too deep. It's at too core of a level. So all you can do is stuff it down, and it's going to rear its ugly head randomly here and there until you can't keep it down anymore. And then it's just gonna, it's like a thorn, like Michael Singer talks about. It's like a thorn, and it's a foreign object in your body, and it's trying to push its way out like a sliver, So this is what's going on with those resentments and stuff within us. It's a foreign body. We're not supposed to be walking around with resentments towards people. Resentment is which means again, and from sentire, which means to feel. So it's to feel again. That's what a resentment is. We're not supposed to be walking around with energy inside of us that makes us re-feel horrible experiences over and over and over again. Eventually we need to work through that. Maybe generations. And this might be important. If you guys don't know this, like, we are changing as people, like, I don't know if you guys know this, but this is the spiritual shift that's happening. This is why everything's been changing. Like, basically, "'cause I said so" was how we raise children for tens of thousands of years. You just did what you were told, and if you didn't, you got a backhand, and that was the extent of parenting to some degree. Of course, there was love involved and all that stuff, but that was kind of the disciplinarian model for so many tens of thousands of years. And then now, all of a sudden, in the last 3 generations, we don't beat our children anymore. Like, and there's all this talk about sensitivity. That's because people are changing. We're evolving into a new way of being. And there's learning curves along this. So, like, this is what we're more sensitive. This is why we're changing things. And I think our learning curve going through this period is that we figured out through our upbringing. But, I think my generation was a pivotal one, but it bled into other generations before and after that we felt more deeply, because that's why we're dealing with our children's emotions more. We're more conscious of how our children are feeling and what they're thinking, and trying to explain things and stuff like that more, instead of just shut up and beating them. Like I said, it's not just our generation. I mean, it's bled into other. It started before us, and it continued a little after us, or is continuing after us. But so we're becoming more sensitive. We're trying to figure out a new way of interacting with our children, and beating them and just being completely blind of their emotions and how we're making them feel isn't an option anymore, because kids are coming in more sensitive. And I think, like I said, a big aspect of that was us and our parents' generation to some degree. That's why we're raising our kids different. It's because of our experiences. Your experiences as a child directly impact how you are as a parent. Positive or negative, they directly impact that. So, why are the kids nowadays, they don't have a lot of consequences? Why? Well, because when the adults like my age were growing up, we had tons of consequences, and they made us feel like crap a lot of times, like, because they didn't understand us. So they still disciplined us. Less beatings, a lot less beatings, although still some. But like the way we felt as children, we were much more sensitive. So our feelings got hurt more than previous generations. So therefore, when we become adults and when we become parents, we're like, well, I'm not going to do that to my kid. I'm not going to make them feel like I felt when I was a kid. Right? That's how the change takes place, generation to generation. They're coming in more and more sensitive. And sensitivity is a good thing, because, like, for tens of thousands of years, wars were acceptable. Literally going around the world killing other people as a manner of living and acquisition and stuff. And like that mentality is going away. Like, the more sensitive we are, we can't. This is why look at the levels of PTSD with the soldiers coming back from war nowadays compared to before. Now, granted, they didn't diagnose it many years before, but a lot of generations before were able to accept it as, this is just the way things are. It's just how it is. Like, you go to war and you kill people, and then you come back and you get back on with your life. And more people were capable of doing it. I'm not saying it was easy, but percentage wise, it seems to me anyway that there was a lot less PTSD. There was a lot less suicides. There was a lot less problems with people coming back from war because of how they were. Now people are more sensitive, and you just can't do that. They can't just go over and see these atrocities and be part of all this stuff and then come back, whether they do it or not, and then come back and just pretend everything's normal. Like the people are too sensitive nowadays. It's not. So this is, but it's going to help us pull away from war more as time goes on, which is, going to benefit us. It's just difficult right now. So let me see if I can kind of just wrap this up. So it's, it's easy to look back. We got to get over blaming our parents for things and understand that if we use those things, excuse me, if we use those things for our benefit, if we heal those things, then we're going to become better people. And we can, as we work through these things, and we can choose something different. So if you're an adult child now and you still have resentments towards your parents and it's affecting the way you're treating them, I suggest you work through it. Like we can never put our work on somebody else. So it doesn't matter if your parents were the seeming cause of it because they were adults and you were a child. Like if they're older now and they're not capable of understanding this, then they're not capable of understanding this. It's just their generation. It's just how they were. If they're 70, 80, 90 years old and they don't get this type of conversation, then they're not going to get this type of conversation, most likely. But the beautiful thing is we don't need them for us to do our work to find our peace and happiness. That's all on us. Now, is it nice when somebody says, hey, sorry about that? Well, sure. But it's not needed. Nor is it the most part of the work. It's a very, very small part of the work. And it's not even necessary. But people think it's the biggest thing. Well, I need closure. I need my parents to acknowledge what they did. No, you don't. You don't need anybody to heal you. All you need is you to heal you. You don't need somebody else. That would be a messed up system. Well, I experienced childhood trauma and I want to live a happy life, but the person who inflicted the childhood trauma on me isn't capable of healing themselves because they're too lost. So I guess that just means that I'm meant to suffer for the next 90 years. Wow. Like slow down and really look at that. That's how you think the system is? That's messed up. Like that is not the system. Okay. So what we can do is heal ourselves and work through this. And then once we see that, then we can go back and look at this and go like, okay, it was nobody's fault. Everybody was doing the best that they could, blah, blah, blah. You might have to dive deeper. Just a little saying like that probably isn't going to clear away all that stuff. You might even need to get some help. So you work through that stuff and then you can interact with your parents in a way that's right for you. And again, it doesn't mean that you spend tons of time together and you talk on the phone every day and all that stuff. That's fine for some people, but it's not going to happen for other people. And that is not necessarily what a loving relationship looks like. I mean, I deeply respect my parents. And if they needed me for anything, I would be there in a minute. And I just went over to Maine and spent, a little bit of time with them. It was like 3 days where it was just almost always just us three. And it was nice, like really nice. Like I loved it. I really, really, really enjoyed it. Not that, it always has to be just us three for me to enjoy it. I enjoy it when my sister's there. My brother-in-law was there at times. Sometimes if my nieces are there, but fine. Even extended family members, my aunts, my cousins. Anybody, bring them all. It's all fine, But my point is that like it was just us, and I really enjoyed my time. I really liked that. And that to me is a reflection of this statement. How your kids treat you when they no longer need you. I don't need them. I don't need them. But I really enjoy spending time with them when I do. Really enjoy it. It's very special. It warms my heart. It warms my heart to know that, I've gotten to this age, and through all this turmoil, I can look at my parents with such love and respect and gratitude for what they did do, and understanding and compassion for what they were incapable of doing when they were younger. I don't blame them in any way. Like it's, I raised my son. He's 23 now. Like, I mean, and here I am, Mr. Conscious and spiritual teacher and self-care and all this stuff and understanding and blah, 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 blah. And you know what? I did some wonderful things with my son. I think the man that he is just, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful when I leaned into my spirituality, because I think some of that stuff was helpful to him to come out the way he is, because he's an amazing, wonderful young man. I don't take credit for all that, because like I made a bunch of mistakes. When I leaned into my spiritual ways of doing things, I did some really good things. And when I fell back in some of the things that my parents did for me, like just be there, I did good things. When I fell into the conception of what a father was supposed to be or acted unconsciously, I did some stuff that wasn't good. We're all going to do some of that stuff, but it's the overall thing that really makes a difference. So I just looked at the time, peeps. I got to fly. All right. Thank you for listening, and I will talk with you soon. Hope that helped. Peace.